Welcome to the channel. Today we're diving straight into the eye of the Fairmont Crest storm. The fundraiser night may have closed its curtain, but a brutal truth blew the doors wide open. Dani chose to sacrifice the sponsor to release a cold chain of evidence. Andre is unmasked not as a protector but as a pawn in a public opinion control game, and behind it all, a sponsor and a PR vendor are pulling an entire bot network like puppet strings. Alana buckles between mother and integrity, Ted is torn between saving the foundation or saving its honor, and Leslie greenlights an independent audit despite the undertow. Will Dani hold the line when money is pulled, allies wobble, and data gets wiped in a hurry? Will Andre drag everything down with him or turn his arrow toward the very machine that exploited him? At the end of this video, I'll tease the next leak that could flip the entire board. If you love smart drama and those moments of trading truth for a real price, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the hottest twists. The city slid into the rhythm of the next morning as if last night were only a long blink, but the ruptured undercurrents did not seal as quickly as the lights went out. In the office that still smelled of fresh paper and plastic from sealed bags, Dani stood before a whiteboard already crowded with arrows, time-stamped boxes like the joints of a body waiting to be reassembled. Her anger was no longer a fist thudding on a table or a pulse pounding in her temples. It condensed into a kind of gravity that dragged every decision straight to the bottom, refusing any escape route made of wishful thinking. She added another line to the independent audit plan, demanded log preservation, confirmed evidence with a third-party custodian, all in language so cold and exact that the fury inside her felt galvanized, no longer sharp, but stubbornly durable. Each funding withdrawal email flashed up like a red stamp pressed to skin, leaving imprints that reminded her the price of putting truth before everything else is never paid in one go. It is collected layer by layer, money first, then reputation, then the quiet safety she once treated like air. On the corner of her desk, the anonymous access card with its ink-smudged gate symbol lay still, both a watchful eye and a reminder of the half-lit regions she could not control. She drafted a new risk list: devices seeded with malware, infrastructure tampered with, staff manipulated, the press misdirected by tales of private life. She ranked the risks by probability, counterweight each with action, anchored actions to time marks. Anger gradually became a detailed timetable, as if only by turning it into work could she keep herself from splintering. Andre sat in an apartment that had burned with light all night, screens reflecting eyes bruised by sleeplessness, a man who had just watched his skin peeled in a public square. The first shame had transformed, not into contrition but into a black cloud that circled, sometimes wanting to blanket everything in one act of destruction, sometimes wanting to restore a reason to go on. He rechecked data bundles, tested the failsafe, verified internal chats mapping the public opinion manipulation he once filed under normal operations. In every decision he had called shrewd, he now saw a needy appetite to sit at the controls of collective feeling to compensate for his own invisibility. His rage pointed everywhere, but mostly toward the thing that fed it, a system that paid people for staging context and pressing the button at the right minute, a sponsor that treated people as material, an ego starved for notice. He named a new folder with something dry and hard, compressed his feelings into it like compressing a log file, and sat until his hands stopped shaking. A car idled on the street, a sweep of headlights crossed the curtains. He imagined hands somewhere tallying his risk, pricing him for either trade or disposal. Anger pushed him to the lip of blowing everything apart, then dragged him back as he recognized how many innocents would be pulped if he pressed send. The conflict changed color by the hour, and within those layers a strange resolve took shape: if he could not return to being a protector, he would at least refuse to remain a switch in someone else's hand. Ted sat in a conference room with half the chairs empty, files stacked like steps before him. Every budget line was a road he had once walked barefoot under hot sun, pleading, co-signing, guaranteeing, now running arrow straight to a cliff hung with bloodless words: reduce, freeze, suspend. His anger was unlike Dani's. It refused to become discipline and settled into a steady hum behind his neck, a headache that blurred the text on every page. He knew every peace-brokering argument would read as cowardice, and every ill-measured show of resolve would kill projects that had kept people alive. He signed the notice to convene a vote, binding himself to procedure as a way to hide from feeling, then found his hands unsteady as he pictured the humans behind each bullet point. He fired off last-ditch emails to secondary sponsors with the audit plan attached, a catalog of preservation steps meant to prove that truth, too, is a form of asset worth investing in. But he knew money does not love truth, money loves quiet, and that recognition made him furious at both camps, those who wanted to let the curtain fall and act as if nothing had happened, and those who believed yanking it harder would solve everything. Between those lines he could only stand still, letting the humiliation of being forced into the villain's part wash through him before it hardened into self-ruining rage. Leslie printed chains of custody and sent filings like throwing anchors into a river in flood. Her fury made no sound. It took the shape of signatures and independent stamps and lines of technical description exact enough to halt anyone hoping for fog. At the same time, the blows turned personal, old photos wrenched out of context, rumors about relationships she never had, anonymous emails questioning the motives of a woman who dared demand an audit. Exasperation forced her to climb to higher steps of discipline, scheduling legal protection for staff, assembling a rapid response team for misinformation, drafting a pledge that if the board refused to authorize an audit she would step down to preserve independence and keep pursuing the matter as a private citizen. She knew the price was solitude, but also that only solitude would keep the truth's color from being diluted. Each time she passed Dani's office and saw the sealed envelope with the anonymous card, she felt in both of them the same species of anger, not vented at the weakest face, not bargained with the invisible hand, only pushed quietly into steps that could not be undone. Alana wheeled her mother out of the hospital at shift change, the chair squeaking like an old clock counting down the last moments of calm before the storm. She had mailed the second packet, carefully blacking out private details, leaving only technical markers and statements. Her anger at herself remained, no longer a scorching flame but a length of hardwood she carried for self-defense when anyone tried to knock her over with guilt. She recounted savings, looked at the invoice, calculated each dialysis session, each dose, each unpaid day. Conflict pulled her between two shores: step forward and accept the brand of traitor, or step back and live with the knowledge that the deceit she enabled would grow. She chose the narrow channel between, moving step by step through the procedures Dani and Leslie had cleared, no hero, no victim, only a person who had been wrong and refused to let the wrong become another's tool. Tyrell hunched in a blue-lit IT room, hands racing past someone else was erasing with cold commands. He snapshot drives, read log blocks like witness statements, baited the botnet to reflex, marked bridge IPs that had surfaced in the Nathan phone case, inching toward a larger picture nobody wanted to stare at. His technical frustration did not erupt into swearing, it hardened into a dry stubbornness. If they wiped at the application layer, he went down to kernel; if they cleaned the infrastructure, he searched the edge; if they claimed an archival routine, he checked time synchronization. Even while drained, he protected a last ledge of calm, knowing a jittery forensics report would collapse in court. His anger was folded square and tucked into one corner of the heart like a sharpened tool in a leather sheath, ready to draw at the proper angle. The interim hearing was scheduled, the building thickened with security, fireboxes were checked, the presentation system was rebuilt with an offline shield. The counter system planned too, and arrived with a move that left everyone off balance. A fake data breach exploded online, stapling Dani's organization to files that didn't exist, whipping the press into a fever while prepared bot accounts fanned suspicion. The anger in the boardroom flipped swiftly into coordination. Leslie routed statements through a verify first, speak later template. Tyrell pushed instant tests showing the files were synthetic trash. Dani ordered internal channels frozen to avoid emotional replies. Ted called secondary sponsors to hold them for 72 more hours. Simultaneously, a false fire alarm emptied the building. In the flow of bodies into the lot, Dani caught herself looking back at the glass door to the records room like staring into a lung someone had just punched. Helplessness surged for a few seconds, then ebbed when she saw a guard cradling a sealed data crate. She let a furious thought pass without taking shape. Chaos lovers always try to turn everything into a race, when the real fight is who can keep procedure alive longer. The hearing opened under indifferent fluorescent light. Each person crossed the threshold carrying a different version of anger. Dani's converted into evidence, Leslie's into procedure, Ted's wrestling with anxiety, Andre's packed and waiting to spring, Alana's signed into her statement, Tyrell's phrased in 8 counts of code. The sponsor's representative sat at the back, face fixed like a statue carved from legal text, an absence that lowered the room's temperature by degrees with silence alone. In the sequence of presentations, a matching checksum appeared, running straight from the anonymous card to the 2 moments when Gatekeeper pressed its buttons, a strip of bridge IPs aligned with nodes used in another campaign, a punctuation profile table sketched the mute outline of anonymous writers. Dani's fury poured into blocks of logic. Ted's inner conflict clung like a shadow to each slide. Andre sat straight, working to keep his face neutral as old escape hatches were sealed with the very language he used to manipulate. When the lights flickered with a minor electrical fault, a thin line gleamed across every mind: either stop because you're tired, or go on because there's no other choice. Dani didn't need long. By now her anger knew how to become action. She proposed stamping more backups, demanded sequester orders for the vendor's old devices if still under contract, announced a schedule to publish audit findings whether funding held or not. Leslie moved like a wound clock, stitching procedural edges, prepping counters to every legal angle the other side would fling. Ted looked at the two of them and understood his hesitation would become an obstacle unless he destroyed it. He signed approval for an outside audit even as his hand shook with payroll math. Andre knew that even if he denied everything, his image would remain in a dark corner of this room. He opened his phone, deleted the reckless leak he had drafted in a spasm of rage, and kept only the pieces that struck the machine, not the nameless. Alana produced new statements, stipends dribbling into a relay wallet like dirty rain, enough to sicken the ordinary reader before the expert was needed. Tyrell closed with a roadmap. If they delete here, he will search there. If they skew timestamps, he will cross-check elsewhere. If they trigger a fire alarm, he will use the evacuation times as markers. Each person set their version of anger on the tabletop like a tool. The room didn't relax, but at least it ceased to be meaningless. Outside, a fine dust of rain turned to film on windshields, blurring Fairmont Crest's neat horizon. Dani stood beneath the awning, breath returning in rough measure, knowing that ahead was no quick victory but a long uphill that would leave calves burning. She didn't soothe herself and didn't add pain, she simply set weekly public updates on the audit, opened the volunteer list to brace for weeks with little money but no shortage of people. Andre took the slope behind the building, watched water pooling along the curb, and saw himself as a shadow sliding a wall, no longer a place among the crowd, but not consenting to be shoved into the drop. He looked up and, for the first time, saw a sky that wasn't a prop, understanding that the one kind of anger worth keeping is the kind aimed at the structure that turned everyone into performance. Ted stayed in the empty room, watching rain shiver on the glass and accepting that courage does not promise a happy ending, it promises only that when the ending comes, he can still face the mirror. Leslie filed seals, checked signatures, messaged the team a simple line, no hurry, no retreat. Alana opened a taxi door, set her mother's head on her shoulder, letting her own trembling blend with the rain to bleed off some of the guilt. Tyrell leaned against a wall, shut his eyes for 10 seconds, and opened them to a task list that had grown longer. The rain lasted through the night as if the sky needed a wash of its own. In different rooms, each person's anger lay beside them like an object with shape, heavy, not pretty, but real. It would still trigger ugly reactions, still make them bite, retaliate, build walls, and yet under the weight of evidence and principle, it would also force each of them to choose their final form. And when morning came, none of them would be excused from the old question that never ages: what further price must be paid for the truth, and what part of the self must be buried so the remainder can stand upright in the next wind? And that's where we pause. Dani has frozen all data, Leslie has signed the audit order, Ted stands at a crossroads between saving the foundation or saving its honor, and Andre opens a new folder with a steel-cold name for the dead man's switch he's kept. On Dani's desk, the anonymous access card with a smudged gate symbol still rests sealed in its envelope, like an eye staring through every claim of innocence. The vendor's servers conveniently clean house just as the preservation order goes out, leaving shredded log fragments that Tyrell is struggling to reassemble, and elsewhere, Alana mails the final envelope, a missing link that could drag the entire chain to the bottom. If one checksum matches, one bridge IP aligns, one name on the board surfaces at the end of the trace, the circle will close in a way no one expects. Next week, every answer may open even larger questions: who truly holds the strings, and what will be the next price Dani chooses to pay?